welcome everybody to this week's episode of the Millennial Show. I have a couple of incredible guests here with me today, talking about the topic of resilience, which is so appropriate and beautiful to have this discussion right now amid all of the changes and transitions and fluctuations going on in the world. So I have with me Chelsea Snyder, who is the Geneva Resiliency Center coordinator, and Greta Steele, who is the coordinator for the Finger Lakes Resiliency Network. And both of them are employees of Family Counseling Service of the Finger Lakes. I'm so grateful for this organization, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you, ladies, for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would love to open this conversation perhaps with our own individual definitions of resilience, and then maybe carry that into how it relates to what's going on in the world right now. Chelsea?
Yeah, I'll start because I know we geeked out about this last week. I think the definition of resiliency for me, I've seen so many different definitions, but for me, it's really about identifying that there is, that something arises, right? It's acknowledgement of something that is either a barrier or an event or something that lies in your path that is a boulder, and your personal emotions, or whether they're mental or physical, your reactions about that boulder in your path, and what you use externally and internally to overcome or step around that boulder, and continue on your path. You might have little pebbles that remind you of that boulder along the rest of your path, but I think it's really about addressing, oh my gosh, this is really overwhelming for me. This is a struggle, right? But you're using your internal toolbox or your external toolbox to build a ladder up or lift it up with another person, and persevere through it. I think it's adaptability. I think it's being optimistic that you're going to get over that boulder, right? No matter if it takes you a minute or 10 years or your whole lifetime. So those are kind of the elements of resiliency that I think of when asked the definition.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Thank you. Greta, how about you?
I think when I think of resiliency, I think of along the lines of what Chelsea was saying, that it's about, there is an element of recognition, at least as I progress in my understanding of resiliency, of recognition that maybe there is an obstacle, and that given my own history and background and experience, I have a choice to react or respond, and oftentimes reaction is first. But then recognizing that there are tools even beyond the ones in my toolbox, which of course includes maladaptive coping strategies, right? Because those are the easiest things to go for. Mm-hmm. But also I see resiliency as encompassing a learning process of learning, because we know resiliency is something that can be taught and learned. So I'm always trying to invest in learning new ways to overcome either internal or external problems. But I find a lot of hope, and I try to bring that into conversations about resilience, that thank goodness for neuroplasticity, and thank goodness that we can, in fact, learn new ways of responding and self-regulating to help us grow.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so grateful for that as well. I know I was sharing with you prior to the interview today that in my education 20 years ago, time flies, going to school for psychology, it was incredible to me to think that there was no real subject matter, if you will, when it came to the lifespan between adolescence and aging, and how much that has shifted in the last 20 years. I actually work really closely with a neuroscientist on my team who is a professor of psychology down in Pennsylvania. We talk about this all the time, our ability to literally change our minds, right? Our ability to change our behaviors, our ability to adapt and shift and pivot and overcome. And Chelsea, I love your recognition, your very pronounced recognition of like, what is this obstacle, right? It's turning those obstacles into opportunities, being able to overcome adversity. And for me in my own life, resiliency has had a lot to do with both the personal factors, what is in my own toolbox, but then also the communal factors, right? What is the level of interconnectedness of the fabric that contains us, that supports us. And I'm so grateful for the work that both of you are doing, because I feel like that is so much a part of your work. It is strengthening that fabric, right? Strengthening that fabric on a personal level, on a communal level. And one of the analogies that I shared with you that feels deeply aligned with my own life experiences, when I think about the idea of community like the body, and then thinking about resiliency is like the myelin that allows the information and the impulses and the connections to happen on a more rapid level. And so again, just grateful for the work that you're doing, because it is something that is so relevant right now, has always been and will always be, but in this time that we find ourselves in the world, it's powerful even more so now than ever before. And so that's what I'd love to chat about too, is like, when it comes to what is going on in the world right now, what has been on your minds and on your hearts when it comes to resiliency?
I mean, for me, it's like, I feel like I'm a pretty resilient person on when I'm at 100% and on my A game, right? But definitely just, in the past 2-3 months, it's like, wow, I'm really on the struggle bus, right? Like, things that I have to now adapt to, right? Where I was adapting and making things happen now takes a whole lot more effort because of the elements that we're now faced with, right? So as a person that gets that passion and drive from working with people and volunteering and hands-on and interacting with community members, that's hard, right? Like I get inspired and really want to dig in deep when I get surrounded by those people. So I think it's harder for me to feel like I have a full cup that I can pour from, right? So I think the level of resilience also is like an internal like check. So like, I know there's days that I'm like, wow, I'm really not feeling very resilient. Like, what do I need to do to fill up my cup? And, whether that's an internal thing, right? Like, oh, I just need to take a break, or I need to do some self-care, or I need to, check myself, or is it reaching out externally and being like, okay, well, these are my supports around me, whether it's like personal or work, who can I like Zoom call or talk to or on the phone to kind of build up that connection piece and feel like I can overcome this challenge or this, adaptation of what work and what life looks like in, this box.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. I want to touch back on this after Greta shares, because I want to explore this idea about self-care and about pouring from that cup, because I think that is something that so many of us are challenged with during this time. I mean, in life in general, but especially during this time. So Yeah, Greta, I would love to hear from you. Like, what's on your mind and heart when it comes to resiliency right now?
I would say first and foremost, as a parent and a former early childhood educator, really, I'm really find myself thinking about the children, and how this is impacting them. Especially, I think that we know a lot from history about how traumatic events and trauma can play out for children. And one of the popular sayings is children are resilient and they bounce back. And while that is true, I think it's important to look a little bit deeper and recognize that hunkering down and working from home for adults is not the same experience for children who are right now essentially disconnected from many of the social supports or services that we're helping to keep them healthy. And so that's definitely something that's been on my mind. And from a proactive standpoint, and especially with the work that we do, I think that there are things we can certainly do as adults and communities to help support and continue to build those resiliency factors. But I think it takes some digging. I mean, even the young ones who can't necessarily articulate what they're feeling or what they're experiencing, but that is a profound loss of connection. So
Yeah, I'm feeling you on that. And it's interesting because I relate that to what Chelsea was talking about in terms of, her self-reflection, right? So something that has been on my mind and my heart this entire time is, okay, so I am a almost 43-year-old woman who is well connected, well educated, and has a level of resources, right? And I am struggling through this time, right? So, take away any one of those things, the level of connection, which we automatically do not have if you don't have technology or just the network alone that you're comfortable to reach out to. Take away that level of education, take away the level of resources, and I imagine how much of a struggle that is, right? And how painful it can be. And so then I relate it to the children, right? Because I look at my own son who is 4, and I see him struggle to articulate what's happening for him, but he misses his friends. He misses his teachers. He misses being able to just go out in the world and connect. He's a very social kid. And, that is so very much part of that fabric we're talking about, right? It's the connection piece. Chelsea, I know you and I talked last week about the book Bowling Alone. It was one of the first books to really hit me on this topic. It's either Robert Putnam or Putman, and I always get it confused. But he talks about how we've had this continuous decline of social capital, over certainly the 19th century, but now in the 20th century, there's this sort of question mark of what happens from here. Right? Are we going to use technology for the greater good to create more connection? Are we going to stand up for that loss that we've experienced and continue to build? And so again, I'm so grateful for the work that you're both doing, because I think that's part of the answer to that question. But when I relate back to this idea of self-care, Rachel Hollis, the author of Girl Wash Your Face, right? She had this quote or analogy, because I won't get the quote correct, but analogy about, imagining ourselves like vases, right? And we're constantly pouring out into everyone and everything around us. And eventually we find ourselves empty. And what are the symptoms of that? Frustration, resentment, depletion, depression, and just continue on down that spectrum, right? But if we just focus on standing tall and pouring into that vase continuously, then we have no option eventually but to overflow into everything and everyone around us. And the idea of that challenged me quite a bit at first, but I felt like I have the privilege to honor that, right? And so now I take that as a responsibility, because if I have the ability to continue to pour into everyone and everything around me, then I need to pour into myself continuously. And so that's become like the mission of my business, the mission of my life, right? To continue to fortify those internal resources so that I can be present to all of the things. And again, I see that through the lens of privilege. I know that it is something that is afforded to me, but again, because of it, I consider it responsibility. So getting back to, this idea of building resilience, right? Building resiliency within our communities, within the people in our communities. What are some of the programs and projects that are most near and dear to you in terms of the work that you're doing right
now? As for like what we're working on right now?
Yeah.
Well, it made me think of two things. One is an activity that I used to do with a support group, where we would put our hand out and trace it, and we would put in all of our supports. So I think that would just kind of as like a takeaway, just, what a great time for us to take pause and sit down and identify who we can go to call, just kind of that chain mail of like, okay, that person's busy, like I'm going to call the next person who could help us out in like the social human resources, like who could you call, right? That phone link. So just so people see it in ink, who can support them, right? Those positive institutions. I think that's great for kids. I think that's great for, adults as well, just to be like, okay, like I feel alone, but I also am very connected. So that kind of self-awareness. I think something that we're working right now on with the GRC is just time stamping Geneva. So we're specific to Geneva. And my hope is to give people the power of choice and awareness of the services and the people and those positive institutions out there, like willing and able to wrap around if they need it. So right now we're time stamping Geneva and really trying to create this community resource guide that is accessible to all, has visuals, and is very clear on what's out there for different service sectors. If you need childcare, here are the top 10 places that you as an individual can look through and choose which one is going to meet your needs, whether it's location or eligibility, or it's reviews, right? Something that really gets me very passionate is that referral process, right? So when I'm looking for a doctor, I may look at my health insurance and see what's covered, but I'm going to ask my good friend or my coworkers or my neighbors, hey, who do you go to? Because that referral is going to be more highly valued to me than what my insurance covers, right? So, and that's going to be worth, right, that value of investment and, really the warm handoff. So I want that good neighborly like referral process, but also giving the power of choice to people so that they feel like they can have a choice. And also it's a kind of continual loop between service providers and community members so that service providers can provide better care to community members, and community members can access more services. And what are the barriers that are lying between that, right? Are there boulders between that, whether it's transportation, or I can't get out of work, or I have a child that I have to find somebody to, hold on to, or I went and I didn't get a great vibe, like, or I had a bad experience, or I'm not sure if they'll be okay with my identity. Like, there's a lot of fear behind a lot of service provider choices. So how do we have an honest and solution-focused conversation to, one, improve the services in Geneva, right, that we have so many of, two, reduce those barriers and have more people access services, right? Because especially right now, we need help, right? So I think everybody's on some sort of struggle bus, but it's the time to really tap into those community resources and utilize them. That's what they're there for. And don't fear that, there's a lot of stigma with asking for help. I think I also am one to say, talk about empty cup, but it's hard for me to ask for help. But I think this is a time to really say, hey, I'm going to give this person a call and see if they can help me. And if not, the next person will, right? There's so many people out there, whether it's an actual nonprofit or for-profit, or it's like a community group or a volunteer group or your next door neighbor, right? There's somebody on that list of who you can reach out to in that hand activity that, nobody here in Geneva wants to see another person struggle. So that's what kind of lights me up, and what I'm really trying to just get the awareness out there and help both the community members access services, but also the services be able to reach more at-risk, vulnerable populations in Geneva.
Amazing. Thank you. Greta, what's on your mind? What's on your heart?
I really like that Chelsea, that you mentioned a neighbor, because I think it really speaks to those resiliency factors, that relationships matter, and it doesn't always have to be someone that you have a long-standing rapport with. That little interactions can make a huge difference. And I think I too can relate to it comes much more natural to me to offer help, to be the one helping, than the one on the receiving end of that help, because that feels vulnerable, because I can do it all, I have it all together. I don't. And I find that the more I practice, and it is practice because it does not come naturally, it is not comfortable. When I practice actually and truthfully answering the question, well, how are you doing right now? And admitting, you know what, I'm really struggling with being a parent in my working from home at my office, which is in the living room, and they want me right when I'm finished, and I want to hide in the bathroom with the door locked and just regroup. But what I found is when I admit that, when I say that to someone else, it's like it gives them permission, both ways, to say, this is okay, well, this is me, this is how I'm doing it, as opposed to what Buddhism might call the second arrow, where I'm already struggling, but then I'm gonna beat myself up further for not struggling in the right way, for not doing this right. Mm-hmm. So and as far as programs, I love the interconnectedness that the GRC has with the Finger Lakes Resiliency Network. I see that they're separate, but there's a lot of interconnectedness. we work primarily to help organizations really, first and foremost, have a cultural shift, a shift in the lens that we all are looking through when it comes to the impact of trauma. When we look at individuals, rather than asking, like, what the heck is wrong with you, changing that to asking, what happened to you? Mm-hmm. That really requires an understanding of the prevalence of trauma and the impact of trauma, and the fact that resiliency is a very powerful and real thing that can help ameliorate some of what we know trauma can do. So it's very exciting to be a part of, because we move through the phases of being trauma informed, and then becoming sensitive. You know, how do we take in the big picture of social determinants of health and impact, and those universal precautions of just everyone has had some trauma. So let's treat everyone with that kindness and respect, so as not to re-traumatize. And then lastly, we focus on, how do we sustain this? This is a process, not an event. So it's not just a checklist. It's really understanding it, and to use your metaphor, Melissa, just weaving this cultural shift into the very fabric of the organization and sustaining it through new hire and turnover, and how that plays into a whole community.
Beautiful. Well, so we could be here literally all day unpacking so many different dimensions and aspects of what both of you have shared about the work that you are doing, and just what is simply on your minds and hearts when it comes to resiliency. I know we need to wrap up, but one of the things that is on my mind and heart, and I'm hoping might also impact our listeners and our viewers, is this question that I have, and we may not find the answers today. We might need to revisit, but Greta, when you were talking about thinking about the children, and I think about how that relates to my own story. What both of you don't know is when I moved from Seneca Falls to Geneva, I moved away from a community that was definitely experiencing a lot of trouble. I lived out on Peterman Road, and I loved our home. I loved the space that we were in. Not too far down the road, however, we had just a lot of struggle and conflict. And right before we left, there was a huge brawl that required like state troopers and all of our police force. And there's a community out there that really has a lack of connection and resources. And I definitely had a lot of fear there as a single parent with my child. But I realized at a certain point that there was like this us versus them kind of thing going on in our community. And I was mirroring that. And so what's been on my heart recently is thinking about the kids that were there. So in my story of the last few years, one thing I can tell you is when my son was born, I talk about that being when I truly was born, right? Like life really didn't feel like it had the same level of meaning until he came, right? But about 3 years after he was born, we had an incident on our street where there was a 3-year-old boy, he was not quite 3, a 3-year-old boy who was killed in his home by his caretakers. And that was a moment for me when some things really came alive, right? It was like this knowing that we need to be wondering about the kids across the street. And it relates back to some stories from way long ago that we'll have to share another time. But I think about those kids. I think about all the kids in the world who are the kids across the street, who are in our neighborhoods, who are near our homes, who are struggling. What can we be doing to raise their level of resilience? Like, I'm about to go make a lot of those hands and go pass them out just to remind these children of, you know, the knowing that there are other people out there in the world who love them, who are thinking of them, who care, when they are going through tough times.
Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind of like, what can we do, right? I think it's, you know, two things specifically. So first off, it just what Greta was saying, it's not like what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you, right? So I think about that so much, right? Like, it's usually those kids at school that are acting out and are really just like taking up all of your energy and time, that really do need that energy and time from you because they don't have it elsewhere, right? It's that coffee shop or, you know, server at the restaurant that's really, really just crabby and giving you short answers. They need that time and attention and like that understanding that, hey, like they got some serious things happening in the background. They might be struggling financially. They might be going through a divorce. They might be, you know, just got some bad news about a illness, right? So I think it's that empathetic of like, hey, you're having, just like a dog that's stuck in a snare, right, is lashing out. What can we do to say, hey, I see that you're like taking my coffee like money, but I see that you're in a snare, and I'm going to be a little bit more kind to you, even if I can't get you out of that snare. But here's like a tip in the tip jar, or, you know, here's a smile or a compliment that I hope, like, you know, is well received, and is that one small connection that might make somebody's day and help them be just a little tiny bit more resilient. I think it's also that the data is out there, right? That kids are less at risk when they have at least one positive adult connection in their life. So this is for so many at-risk youth, but I think it translates to adults as well. So whether it be a coach or a teacher or a parent's or a friend's parent or a grandparent or a cousin, that one positive adult role model or person that they can connect with, I think is such an important thing. I think we take it for granted sometimes, our connections and relationships with one another. But people just need to feel that connection, right? That one person that they can turn to and be like, hey, coach, like, I'm really struggling at home. Like, I am not, like, I don't know when I put my head down, like, what's going to happen the next day. And that person doesn't need to solve those things, right? But they need to just be there for that person and be like, hey, whatever, like, what do you need right now? Is there anything that I can do? Is it just a listening ear, or is it like, you know, referring to some sort of like help, or do we need, like, asking permission, right? But also being like, I'm here for you no matter what, no matter if you lash out at me for helping, like, I'm there if you need, you know, a minute. So I think just having that empathy and those small drops into people's buckets, but also really solidifying those connections, especially with young people right now that don't have that when they go to school, right? You think of all the teachers and principals and staff and cafeteria workers and coaches that they're missing out right now, art teachers, right? If you can be that for a neighborhood kid or your niece or nephew or your next door, like, that's like the perfect time, whether it's, you know, it's probably not going to be in person, but I mean, let's go old school and new school, like pen pals, text messages. Like there's so many different ways you can get creative that just say, hey, I'm thinking of you. I care. Like those are the little things that really make a big difference, are the things that I love the most.
I love it. You just gave me some great ideas.
Good.
Yeah. Greta, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I think that in these times, it's something that I try to remind myself of daily is, you don't have to be a therapist in order to make any interaction, no matter how big or small, therapeutic. I took that quote from somewhere. I've read it. It's not my, but I really think about that, in this time where we're all struggling, and we know that struggle looks different from person to person. And I think that if we can, again, shift that lens, people aren't seeking attention, they're seeking connection, and they're seeking to be seen. And there's a lot of people that just feel invisible. And when I think of that and the statistics that we know, that incidences of domestic violence and child abuse and things like this, even more severe punishment is happening as kind of a byproduct of finding ourselves in this situation and being in our homes. I think that even those little random acts of kindness really do echo louder than maybe they would otherwise, because it's easy to just feel trapped in our own space and forget that we are connected. Mm-hmm. And so for myself, one of the things that I've been doing in my two children is we've been trying to just do a random act of kindness every day, even if it's leaving like a Post-it note or buying someone a coffee in the drive-through, a stranger or whatever, because I think, even as a parent who gets flustered when someone, even just the other day, I was like rolling my eyes, like, okay, you two, like, please get in the car, we have to go, and that smile from another adult, just like, I see you, it's hard. Mm-hmm. And it makes a difference. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that I guess that's people aren't giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Such a good reminder for everyone right now. Right. All right, ladies. Well, I'm so grateful for both of you for being here today. Grateful for the work that you do. We are going to have to wrap up. But, on that last note, and with both of your recommendations of things that we can be doing, one of the mottos that I've had since this pandemic started is to spread love, to be kind, and that in and of itself will create a movement. So thank you both so much. Have a wonderful day, and I'm sure we'll be chatting soon.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.